School choice. What does that actually mean? And what would it actually cost? We're getting our first look at proposed legislation that could send state money to families or private schools instead of public schools. We've been down this road before. It ain't easy to get a voter-approved initiative onto an Idaho ballot. But should it be more difficult? There's a chance that choice could be up to you. They say some things never change. What we report on may not, but how we report it and what we wear certainly has. We're taking another trip down memory lane to what was happening back in the early 80s here in Idaho's capital city. It is likely the biggest topic still yet to be talked about at the Idaho State House. School choice, fund students, not systems, education savings accounts. Well, we at least have a formal introduction to join the conversation because late yesterday afternoon, the dozen lawmakers who call themselves the Freedom Caucus dropped their latest banger, an attempt to add a new chapter to state code, Chapter 66, Title 33, otherwise known as the Freedom in Education Savings Account Act. However, it's not an act yet. It's technically not even a bill and still in the early stages of just a proposal at this point. It hasn't even been brought up in any committee yet. The plan is to create a savings account for families with K through 12 students. So instead of public money going directly to school districts, it, or at least a portion of it, would follow the student to whatever school they choose to attend, private, charter, magnet, or home. So here's how the proposal would work. Every year, a parent would sign up their K through 12 kid for this education savings account, an ESA. Then the Department of Education, instead of sending the money they would send to a school district for that student to attend a school in that district, they would put 80% of that money into an ESA. The district would get the other 20%, which in today's dollars, let's say if the state spends $9,100 per year per student, which is still last in the country, by the way, 80% of that would be about $7,200 per student. Their breakdown, according to the Freedom Caucus, that makes it around $6,000. That number, still debatable. That money would now be available to each family to spend it how they see fit. For private school tuition and textbooks, to buy school supplies for homeschoolers, to pay a tutor for extra help after school, those kind of things, including transportation, including any services provided by a public school, classes, or any extracurricular program. You wouldn't be able to use it for non-educational things like TVs, telephones, video game consoles, those kind of things. But that money would be distributed by the Department of Education through an easy-to-use electronic or online funds transfer service. That is yet to be determined. What would be determined, despite state money, public money, going to non-public schools, there would be no state control over said non-public schools. Private schools would not have to change their creed, their practices, their curriculum, or their admissions policies, meaning they can still turn down anyone for any reason, disabilities included. Nor would there be any supervision over those non-public or home schools, meaning there would be no accountability or state assessment requirements. So those are some of the highlights. And to be fair, this 7-page proposal is just that. It's just a proposal. Again, has not yet been printed as a bill or even introduced into a committee. But when it does, or I should say, if it does, it could look a lot different than this. But knowing what we know now, we wanted to spend a little time on the biggest aspect of school choice and ESAs, the funds following students. However you view school choice, the discussion always revolves around the cash to fund it. And in Idaho, if or how that money flows into private schools. Local education nonprofit Bloom works primarily with Idaho charter schools. Their CEO spoke with Andrew Bartline today to break down this early draft legislation and explain his concerns with the language in it.
School choice, fittingly, has two schools of thought.
For some people, it means that they want the dollars to follow children to any school of their choice, be it private, public, charter. Some go a little more narrowly and they'll say, I support school choice as long as it's only public school choice.
Terry Ryan is the CEO of Idaho education nonprofit Bloom, and he sees a problem with blurring the lines that divide private and public education.
We have a strong Blaine Amendment.
What do you mean when you say Blaine Amendment?
The Blaine Amendment is a prohibition that's been around since the late 1800s on any public dollars going to education in private and specifically religious schools.
The benchmark has declined from.
But the Idaho Freedom Caucus's most recent school choice draft legislation allows just that. The state legislature would set aside nearly $20 million of state money. That comes out to roughly $6,000 a student. Wherever that student chooses to enroll, the $6,000 would fund that same school, meaning any student enrolled in a private school would receive nearly $6,000 annually to subsidize their private school tuition.
Oh, people are concerned that this takes the publicness out of education.
But that's not new. The United States Supreme Court struck down the state of Montana's Blaine Amendment in 2020. The majority opinion held the amendment violated the free exercise of religion.
So you're seeing more energy and efforts directed at encouraging, enabling private school choice, that is, public dollars following children to private schools, religious schools, or the such.
Ryan further adds the draft legislation at hand has holes in its logic.
On page 6, line 10, it says, "This chapter does not permit any government agency to exercise control or supervision over any non-public school or homeschooling." It seems a little unique to me that state dollars can go into a private school and there are no strings attached at all.
That's exactly what I'm referencing. And what's interesting and ironic with sort of the side that's pushing this is that they're bashing the public school because of their low test scores, their low graduation rates, and they're saying, well, let's give money to families so their children can opt out, but then we're not going to worry if they're actually learning anything in the school of choice that they go to. So philosophically, I support dollars following students to the schools of their choice. However, I do think there should be some strings attached around the performance for these dollars, and that is not in that legislation. If this legislation is signed into law, the first thing that's going to happen is going to be a lawsuit directed at it. That's what's happened in Kentucky. That's what's happened in West Virginia. I think that's what's going to happen in Iowa. So this will be litigated. And then, so I'll stop there.
Ryan says the Blaine Amendment is still in Idaho's Constitution despite the Supreme Court ruling over Montana's Blaine Amendment and what's happened elsewhere. Ryan works with a lot of charter schools and generally supports the idea of school choice despite his concerns that he sees in this specific draft. And he wanted to clarify as well that he's sort of more in favor of some incremental steps. You look at Arizona, that's kind of the poster child, for the lack of a better term, of what school choice advocates support,
right.
Universal school choice advocates. He said it took him like 20 years to get there.
True.
So just snapping your fingers and trying to get it overnight, that's not how it worked with charter schools and how they've been built up in the state, and he doesn't think that's the best option for school choice in the state either.
I would guess the Freedom Caucus is looking at what works in Arizona and saying, well, let's just cookie cutter that here in Idaho, and it should work instantly, but we'll have to see how it goes. We don't know how many people will be interested in this. Again, this is just a proposal. There could be a lot of changes. One thing I learned today, that accountability thing. I don't know that there's going to be a lot of legislators out there that are in favor of giving money to a school or a private school and saying, yeah, do with it what you will. Teach your students as you see fit, and we have no say in that.
And I'm no legal expert, but yeah, it seems tough to say no strings attached to public dollars. I think a lot of taxpayers are going to say, well, I have thoughts about that myself.
All right, this isn't the last we are going to hear of this. We'll dive deeper into this as we get a little further into legislative session and see what actually gets proposed when that day comes. All right, thank you very much, Andrew. All right, if at first you don't succeed, then try again. I think W.C. Fields said if you don't succeed after that, then stop, you're making a fool of yourself. That's another story. That is the thought process, though, for Idaho lawmakers who, again, want to try and change requirements of a citizen ballot initiative in Idaho. New proposal was pitched this morning to basically increase current requirements to make that bar a lot higher. Joe Paris has followed this topic for a number of years because, it has been a couple of years, Joe, that they've been trying to get this. So what's the new angle? What's different from, say, 2021 when they tried this?
Well, yeah, this is a new angle into the conversation. It really takes this from the legislature over to the people of Idaho. And
Okay.
I'll explain here. So this whole story, as we touched on, it dates back a few years. In 2021, Idaho lawmakers actually passed a bill on the initiative process that Governor Little signed into law. And under it, the threshold for qualifying a voter initiative went from getting signatures from 6% of registered voters in 18 out of Idaho's 35 legislative districts to 6% of registered voters in 35 of Idaho's 35 legislative districts, so all of them. Now, Governor Little wrote in his signing letter in 2021 that, quote, whether SB 1110, which was the name of the bill, whether it amounts to an impermissible restriction in violation of our Constitution is highly fact-dependent and ultimately a question for the Idaho judiciary to decide. Well, they did. In 2021, a unanimous Idaho Supreme Court decision overturned the new threshold for the initiative process, resetting it back to where it is now, 18 out of 35 districts at 6%. And an Idaho Supreme Court opinion included the thought that, quote, a majority of the court held that the initiative referendum power is a fundamental right reserved to the people of Idaho, to which strict scrutiny applies. So let's take a look at the proposal where it sits right now. But the whole angle into this, instead of the lawmakers, what if the people of Idaho voted to make that same change? A change that, again, would require 6% of registered voters in 35 of Idaho's 35 legislative districts to qualify initiative. Well, this is the pitch from Senator Doug Okonowitz.
So what this approach does is it puts the question to the people, and it allows them to make that decision and decide if this is something that's in their best interest. So that should inoculate it from any legal troubles, and we get back to the issue.
So we've heard from Idaho Republican lawmakers and leaders in recent years that the current status of the voter initiative process boxes out the voice of rural Idaho. Critics of the status quo, as it sits now, also say that the system risks seeing an avalanche of initiatives like the state of California has seen. For perspective on the realities of running an initiative campaign, I spoke with Luke Mayville, the co-founder of Reclaim Idaho. That is the group that got Medicaid expansion on the ballot and did have it passed successfully. Now, Mayville tells me that the proposed change would essentially prevent grassroots campaigns for a variety of reasons.
That would make it virtually impossible for any grassroots group to ever get an initiative on the ballot again. It's possible that if you're an organization with millions of dollars, you could still do it, but it's just much too high of a hurdle for any citizen group to clear. One main reason is because if there were an opposition group that poured millions of dollars into defeating a campaign, all they need to do is defeat the campaign in one district. If they can just keep the initiative off the ballot in one district, they keep it off permanently, even if voters in 34 other districts wanted it.
So the big difference here is the way the topic is being approached. The Idaho Supreme Court made it clear they don't think the Idaho legislature should be able to put those ballot requirements onto the people of Idaho. However, if the people of Idaho want to do it to themselves, well, that's their prerogative. Now, if the idea passes through lawmakers and does make the ballot, only a simple majority vote would be needed to get the idea passed and the constitutional change. So yes, this would be changing the constitution of the state of Idaho, so a big ask if we get to that point. But Brian, I do want to mention to you real quickly that if it does pass the House and the Senate, it does have to pass by a 2/3 majority, like we saw last session with lawmakers being able to call themselves back. Right. So it'd be the same process. It'll be interesting, though, to see if this goes this far, and I'd be interested to see on a vote if Idahoans would be in favor of this or not.
2/3 of the legislature, but only a simple majority of the people would have to vote for it. So,
yeah.
All right, we'll see if we'll get that choice. All right, thank you very much, Joe. It's like a yearly occurrence. You can count on someone at the State House to offer up something that is, let's just say, of questionable origin. Republican Senator Tammy Nichols, co-chair of the Freedom Caucus, is worried about vaccines being put into people's food without them knowing about it. She introduced a bill yesterday that would prevent such things, and it would change the Idaho Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to prevent manufacturing and the sale of foods with those materials in them unless, of course, there's proper labeling for consumers.
Basically, for the consumer, what we're looking at is just providing notification of the presence of such vaccine or vaccine materials that are within the product. So it's just giving another disclosure for the public to be able to know what is in that product. Like I said, this is a newer type of precedence that's being set for not only our nation, but worldwide. And so I do know of mRNA is one that they are looking at trying to add into right now lettuce for public consumption.
Okay, hold on to that. I know what you're thinking, a vaccine and food. Okay, this bill was likely spawned by a now debunked and fake tweet supposedly put out by Bill Gates, you know, the Microsoft guy, about he supports vaccines in the food supply to get those who are vaccine averse, allegedly. Well, it's not true, and that tweet wasn't even real, created by a conspiracy theory website. However, what is true, and you heard Senator Nichols now talking about it. According to UC Riverside, researchers at the Southern California school were given a $500,000 grant in 2021 to see if mRNA, The same stuff they used to make the COVID vaccine can be put into plants like lettuce and spinach. Long-term goal is for people to kind of grow that kind of stuff in their own backyard, if that's even possible. It will also make it easier for those without access to such medical care around the world. If they can't get access to a needle, how can you get a vaccine, right? It would make it easier. It's unclear if Nichols was referring to this study in particular, but you heard her mention it. But UC Riverside told us in an email their study is merely an experiment, and currently no genetically engineered food containing vaccines actually exists. But we're still going to talk about it at the State House. A full committee hearing on the bill is coming soon. I mean, what else is there to talk about? KTVB is coming up on its 70th anniversary. I believe it's happening in July. And in those 7 decades, we have acquired quite the archive vault. We just happened to be in there this week, and we stumbled across this tape here. This one right here, that just happened to hold several stories KTVB's reporters covered back in late January 1981. The label on the back says abortion, actually. We're still talking about it today. Weird how most of it was centered around the State House back then. So the question is, where were you 42 years ago this week? We know where we were.
The third week of January 1981 marked a momentous occasion in America.
I had received word officially for the first time that the aircraft carrying the 52 American hostages had cleared Iranian airspace.
That was when President Carter first learned that the 52 American hostages were on their way home after more than 14 months of captivity. Moments later, the news was heard by millions of people across the country and around the world. Here in Boise, the first signs of celebration were heard near the State House.
I'm just expressing through the bells what everyone is feeling.
It was an announcement worth an extra edition of the Idaho Statesman.
Read all about it now. Get your extra. Hostages freed from Iran.
It had been 25 years since the Idaho Statesman newspaper hit the streets with an extra edition.
That day,
it's a privilege for me today,
Lieutenant Governor Phil Batt, acting as governor, issued a proclamation
of thanksgiving concerning the release of our brave American citizens.
He signed it.
Proclamation calls for the ringing of bells, the flying of our flag,
under the watchful gaze and tobacco haze of a guy ripping a heater in a three-piece suit. Welcome to Flavor Country, and welcome to Timeless Topics at the State House.
We're looking at trying to maintain programs, but we realize with the present amount of dollars we have, programs have to be cut, and when 72% of your money is in education, education has to be cut.
That's what most Finance Appropriation Committee members will be thinking this week as they hear testimony from state education agencies.
That cutting continued. Today, education accounts for 61% of state revenue. Putting a stop to spending seemed to be a theme, with then State Senator Jim Risch railing against raising the $4,200 legislative salary. But this guy?
And I have an old fishing partner that happens to be a Pollock.
You can't say that, but the senator didn't stop there.
He says, you have it made now. I said, what do you mean, Eugene? He says, you have it made. You beat politics. You make lots of money.
Yes, using Pigeon Polish to protest your pay. Perfect.
Some crooked stole a clapper.
There was a lot of alliterative language lobbed that week. Listen to David Leroy.
Return from its clandestine location, the clanger.
So do you intend to convict the culprit who copped the copper clapper?
Clearly, we'll convict him.
Clever. Not so smart? Lawmakers not paying for parking.
But a substantial number are still parking on the street and still getting parking tickets. Suggestions range from requiring free parking around all public buildings to a statewide ban on parking meters. Freshman Senator William Moore, a Hayden Lake Republican, says he's received about a dozen tickets already.
Go facetiously, I'd like to propose that we outlaw parking meters and the fines for them throughout the state. I think that might get some action if I could put in a bill to that effect. But
while the parking tickets piled up, so did the snow.
It was Friday night's storm that dumped 10 inches of new snow on Bogus Basin that made the reopening possible.
More than 700 skiers showed up to partake in the new powder.
It's pretty good. It's, I don't know, they need some more snow still, but it's pretty decent.
After the hill went on hiatus for 3 weeks.
Did you get desperate enough that you took off to other ski areas, or did you just figure
No, I'm unemployed, so I sat around and watched soap operas, and I knew it was going to hit sooner or later, so, you know, the young and the restless are just going to have to wait, I guess.
Have your tickets out, please.
And that
She's fabulous. She's marvelous.
was the week that was
Read all about it now. Get your extra.
in January 1981.
Newsbeat 7.
Newsbeat 7. Newsbeat 7.
We appreciate all the text messages today about the educational savings account. We got a lot of them. Going to show you as many as we can, starting with this one from Larry. Bull, my taxes are for public schools, not any other. Those that choose other than public schools can fund the costs. I want my money to be monitored for effectiveness. Tax funds are not to be used without monitoring or rules, says Larry. I think parents who choose private charter schools have every right to do so, but I'm not in favor of my tax dollars being used for someone to send their kids to a private school. It was intended for public education, in my opinion, says Ginny there. Looks to me like this thinly disguised voucher plan is a form of rich folk welfare. Looking forward to state funds for our school, socialist witches. School for socialist witches. So yeah, if you want to use it for that, I guess you're entitled to. Looks like I went to college for less than what it costs to go to middle school these days, says Joe Ford there. Vaccines and lettuce. Wow, is the legislature ever going to talk about issues like property tax, grocery tax, children dying from medical neglect, crumbling schools, asked Sheila. A couple of topics out there. We're just getting started, by the way, so it could come up. Maybe the mRNA vaccine and lettuce could be marketed as Soylent Green. It's people. We'll see you back here next week.